Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to New Hampshire Next, a Summit for Young Changemakers, Day 2. If we haven't met, my name is Will Stewart, and I am the Executive Director of Stay, Work, Play New Hampshire, a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to attract and retain more young people here in the Granite State. Our primary goal for New Hampshire Next is to inspire young Granite Staters to create positive change in their communities and the state as a whole. And one of the main benefits of events like this is the opportunity to meet other people who share similar passions. And while we wish we could be together in person, and hopefully we will be again very, very soon, it's great that we do have the option to connect virtually. And to that end, I'd like to invite everyone to, if you feel like it, introduce yourself down in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're logging in from today. Yesterday, we had a great kickoff to the Changemaker Summit as we heard from 3 young changemakers who are making New Hampshire better via the arts. And today, we're going to hear from 3 young changemakers who are making change via public policy at the local level. Before we get started, though, I'd like to ask one quick favor from everybody. We'd love to take a screenshot of everyone who's joining us here today. So if you don't mind, could you turn on your cameras for just a brief moment? And my colleague Beth Sansusi is going to count us down, take a quick picture. So if you could all give us a nice big smile, Beth.
All right, folks. So let's do in 3, 2, and 1. We're all set, Will. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. So now what we're here for, New Hampshire Next. So as I mentioned today, our panelists are 3 young policymakers who are serving at the municipal level here in New Hampshire. And they're going to tell us their stories about what it's like to be a policymaker at the local level here in New Hampshire. And after the panel discussion, we're going to have time for a live Q&A. So if you have questions as our panelists are speaking today, feel free to throw them in the chat or hang on to them till the end. Hopefully we'll have time to get to a few and hopefully all of them today. So with that, let's get to know our panelists just a little bit before we jump into the conversation. First up, we have Mike Giacomo, who grew up in the small town of Nelson, New Hampshire, population 500, and graduated from Keene High School. Mike went on to attend Clarkson University and earned a degree in chemical engineering. After a brief stint working for ExxonMobil, he moved back to Keene to take a job at Markham Image as a chemical manufacturing engineer. In 2007, he joined the board of the Keene Young Professionals Network and has served as their president for the last 2 years. He volunteers for half a dozen organizations in town, and in his free time enjoys disc golf, gardening, mushroom hunting, and, until his recent retirement from the sport, playing rugby. In addition, he is also a pub trivia host and MCs a number of events in Keene. In 2015, 2016, and 2017, he ran unsuccessfully for Keene City Council, but finally won a seat in 2019. And Mike, we definitely want to hear more about that. Just goes to show that persistence really does pay off. Mike he currently serves as the vice chair of the Municipal Services, Facilities, and Infrastructure Committee on the council and serves as on the Partner City Committee and Community Power Committee. He currently lives in Keene with his wife Rachel and their 2 cats. Welcome, Mike. Next up, we have Lovey Roundtree Olaf, who is a politician, educator, as well as a producer and a storyteller. After graduating from Bowdoin College and teaching for a few years, Lovey attended Harvard University and earned her master's degree in education. Working for a variety of nonprofits, including Prep for Prep and Columbia Business School, she returned to elementary level teaching. While raising her children in Exeter, she became more politically active and was elected to sit on the SAU Budget Advisory Committee. Her passion for the arts, education, and enhancement of power for underserved population keeps her busy. In March of 2020, Lovey was elected as the first African-American woman to the Exeter Select Board. In addition to serving on the Exeter Select Board, Lovey manages and hosts her own podcast series called The Podcast System. Lovey and her guests tackle the inequalities faced by Blacks, Browns, the unseen, and the underserved. She dissects current affairs, politics, pop culture, and everything in between. Welcome, Lovey. Finally, we have Jonathan Weinberg. Jonathan attended Whitman College, where he studied philosophy. He is also a 2018 Concord High graduate, and in high school, he led students in a walkout in solidarity with the students of Marjorie Stoneham Douglas, testified to the state legislature for common sense gun measures, and continued to help his peers become more civically engaged. He went on to organize statewide rallies, attracting more than 4,000 participants. Jonathan was elected to the Concord School Board in November 2020. In his free time, he enjoys playing soccer, hiking, and trying to convince his friends to write letters to the editor. Welcome, Jonathan. So let's get right into it. Let's jump right in. We'd love to hear, I think, first of all, kind of help us set the stage, everyone. Let us know, how did you get to being an elected official? What was your path to elected office in your community? And what made you want to enter the political arena in the first place? Jonathan, you want to kick us off maybe?
Sure. I'll be the youngest one to go. Definitely being on the school board, it's so important to have like young people, especially it impacts like kids, people to 18, 21 years old, and seeing how a lot of the individuals on the board were very like detached from it. They had students in the district, but they themselves were not in the district in very recent years. So it seemed like important to elevate voices of people who recently only graduated 3 years ago. And mostly I just wanted to set a precedent for young people being involved in local office. And if someone sees someone that looks like them, they're more likely to get involved, and just use it as like an educational opportunity for people learning about how important the school board is in daily functions, from curriculum to really just overall creating a school culture overall.
Awesome. Lovey, how about you? I know you mentioned a little bit in your bio, kind of getting involved at first at the SAU level there in Exeter and then running for select board. But what was that path for you? How did you get to the point in your life where you decided, I'm going to put my name on the ballot?
Right. So similarly speaking to Jonathan, being a former educator and raising children in Exeter, New Hampshire, I'm from New York City. And so my perspective on what education and public education looks like was a little different when I got up here. And the first instance where I realized that the literature that was being offered to students wasn't as diverse as the population as it was evolving pushed me to become more active. And instead of simply complaining, I said, well, there's an open seat in the budget advisory committee. That's a starting point to at least find out, where's the money going? You know, what's the professional development look like for faculty and staff? So that was the real kickoff for me, because I'm a believer in, if you have a problem with something, you have to have a solution, or at least a thought about it. You can't just sit back and complain. And so that was really what started it for me. And then it just led to the Exeter Select Board, which has been a really interesting experience that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Awesome. How about you, Mike? It sounds like you've put your name on the ballot a few times, and made it over the finish line this past time. What was it that made you want to run for office in the first place, and also to keep running? I mean, I imagine some people might be a little downcast, put off perhaps, if they didn't make it after a few times.
Well, I'd be lying to say that I have such kind of high ideals going into it as the other two folks. And also the reason changed over the years from the first time that I ran to the most recent. The very first time I ran was, again, a very kind of might seem silly reason for a lot of people outside of the Keene community, but Keene was known for a very large event that it used to hold every single year, the Keene Pumpkin Festival, and this would bring tens of thousands of people into town. It was amazing for the economy, millions of dollars every year coming into the community. And we had an issue with Keene State College during the 2014 or 2015 festival, ended up getting shut down by council. I went and spoke on behalf of, not on behalf of the festival, but in favor of it. And just watching the reaction of council to a early 30 something going in there and saying, no, this is a really important economic engine for this community, for a lot of the hospitality industry that sees, they'll have hotels booking out years in advance. And that all the restaurants, there are a lot of nonprofits that base their entire annual budget was based on this one event. And so I went there and spoke in favor of it and presented my ideas, and watched the city council and quite literally roll their eyes at me and just kind of sit back in their seat and say, basically, are you done now? And it was really just really depressing to me. And so I figured the only way to fix that, and to have public officials that do care about the community and do care about the things that actually drive this community economically and in other ways, is to replace them. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring that year. I had a couple other folks that suggested, as I do as well, they were also running. I did not win, they did. And then a couple of years later, I said, all right, well, I'll run again. The guy I was running against, I felt needed to move on, and lost that as well. And then finally in 2019, I didn't even want to run. I had pretty much decided I was not going to anymore. But there were a whole bunch of other young folks all running at the same time. I use young very loosely. I'm in my late 30s, but they all ran. And the net effect of all this whole young wave moving forward ended up electing most of us, which was fantastic. So it was really, this was kind of an opportunistic in 2019. And that's how I ended up getting in finally.
Well, certainly, things, motivations change over the years, certainly. Lovey and Jonathan, I'm curious, what was your reason for choosing to run, for the offices that you ran for? And Lovey, I know it sounds like you had, two, and Jonathan, you chose the school board, of course, but why those particular offices out of all the ones that you could run for, both at the, local and state level? Why did you choose what you chose?
I'll jump in, and completely honestly, I was asked to run and I said no. And then they asked me again and I said, absolutely not. And after the fifth time, where we had a sit down and there were other people who had previously been on the select board and others spoke to me and said, I think you have an opinion. And I think you have a vision that can be utilized on the select board. It took me a few weeks. It wasn't a real quick decision. It wasn't my primary thought. And I was like, I don't have time for this. I've got kids. I have the other board I'm sitting on. I'm working part-time. Like, I kind of want to have a social life too, whatever that is. And so, it really took me a while, but in having conversations with others who had sat on the board, I realized that this was an opportunity, not just for me, but for my kids and for my friends and those who, were looking to me to make a change.
I think similarly, sorry, Will, there was kind of a vacuum. If anyone has followed along with the Concord School District the past few years, it has not been an easy run. And there were many members that decided to step down at this past year. So that kind of created a time for more people to step in. And kind of just speaking to other people, I was very hesitant at first. Obviously, I was still in school, kind of wanted to finish off my college fun time. But once kind of time went on and saw that no one else was really kind of going into it, or really just kind of realizing that the younger voice was so important in that role, that I wanted to go. And it's just such an influential and impactful position that I don't think people understand. Different to the state government, there's 9 people who make decisions for a district that has over 4,000 students, which is monumental. And we recently just passed a $96 million budget, which is unique for Concord because we're an autonomous school, different to others. And I think that in itself kind of showed just how important it is to have someone with the perspective of that is younger, and just only reinforces that I'm that much more excited that I ran.
I'm also curious to know, it sounds like, Lovey, you said you're from New York originally. Mike, from Nelson. Jonathan, I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you grew up in Concord. I'm curious to know how long each of you lived in the communities that you're currently in before you decided to run for office. And Jonathan, I know you were like away at college, pre-COVID, right? So what was it like? How do you feel like you have to be a known quantity? How can like an outsider like yourself come in and get elected, to a very local, personal office?
Good question. There were definitely people who, and I've been here, our family's been here now 6 years. So when I ran initially for the SAU Budget Advisory Committee, we were here 3.5 years. So really new to the area, but we were committed, and we are still committed to staying here and raising our family here. And so for me, it wasn't a matter of how long I had to live here in order to be active here. There were people who said, well, she's not from New Hampshire and she doesn't, understand New Hampshire. And I'm like, I understand myself. I understand that I live here. And I also understand that there are now more people like myself moving here. So that's the voice that needs to be part of the conversation.
Mike and Jonathan, how about the two of you?
Yeah, I've been, well, I mean, as I said, I grew up in Nelson, so it's about 15 minutes outside of Keene where I now reside and serve on city council. But I'd been living in Keene probably about 6-7 years proper, I think, in Keene proper before I ran. But I'd been working in Keene for a little longer than that. But I think that the mentality of you have to be from an area to run it's incredibly pervasive. And also looking at the average voting age, a lot of the folks who are going to be the ones placing votes are the ones that place the most value on their longevity. And in fact, in 2017, when I lost, the guy I ran against, that was completely the platform was, go up to older folks and say, hey, remember when this was there? Remember when this shop was there? And it was kind of his MO. That's how he got people to, to know that he's the safe one. He's the one that's been around forever and understands Keene's history. Whereas, even though I'd been there for a lot longer than most of my peers, when he's been living in Keene longer than I've been alive, it's hard to compete with that from a public relations perspective, I guess. But I think that is changing with the demographics shifting.
It most definitely is. Jonathan, how about you?
So I actually was born in Burlington, Vermont. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life, but I always make the joke to people that I'm not as granola and crunchy as you might think. I've lived in New Hampshire for my formative years since I was 10 years old. So definitely you adapt a different mindset than in Vermont. But at the same time, I think New Hampshire politics is so unique in general. And growing up in Concord, we were like the central location for presidential election years. And the first in the nation primary, it's kind of just unique. We had like every presidential candidate visit our school, people so accessible at all different areas. And just elected officials are your neighbors. In other places where they're like, oh, who is this person? You're like, well, Annie Custer lives down the street. Our state senator lives over here. School board here. It makes it very approachable then to kind of enter into the field. And just, I think in that self being like inundated with politics from an early time, especially with the 2016 primary here and being in high school and the just media that we got was very important in my decision.
I have to clarify that I was technically born in Connecticut, so I am not a native, and I never will be, no matter how hard I try.
Yep, I think that's all of us, a lot of us here right now, certainly all of us talking. But I think that, Jonathan, your point about, I think the word accessible that you used is very true. And I mean, all three of you are living proof of the accessibility of the system, that you don't have to grow up here. You don't have to have been here since the Mayflower landed, that, if you have a willingness to serve and a willingness to work to get there, that you can get elected. It's not a guarantee, of course, but it certainly is possible. And so I'm curious to know about the work toward getting to office. Two of you, Lovey and Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, you both got elected to your current offices, during the time of COVID. And Mike, you were a little bit before things hit. So I'm curious to know, Lovey and Jonathan, what was it like? How did you actually campaign when you couldn't campaign in a lot of more traditional manner of, shaking hands and pressing the flesh, as they say?
So I literally was on the cusp of COVID. On election day, there were announcements about this new virus and so at the polls, people were coming up to handshake and let me just high five you. So I can only imagine, and I'll be curious to hear, Jonathan, your perspective, because even that was difficult, trying to engage face to face with people as a pandemic was brewing and not wanting to seem distant, especially with those who traditionally wanted to shake hands and get very close and tell me all of your stories. And so I was very lucky that I was right on the cusp, because I have no idea what would have made it far more difficult if I had to do it completely in a remote world.
You definitely had to reimagine campaigning. And I think young people had more of a benefit with this, kind of growing up with technology, kind of advocating on Facebook, advocating via Twitter, using all the social media forums, was very kind of just beneficial in my book. And you kind of had to weigh, do you want to canvass? Oh, well, because I was elected in November. Do you want to canvass? Will people receive that well? Do I feel comfortable doing that? And you had to weigh the cost and benefits of each of these. But definitely one of the biggest things was just visibility and going out there, holding signs on the side of the street, not always like interacting with people one-on-one, but the more in New Hampshire politics, the more someone sees your sign, the more likely you're to get elected. It's just the way it works psychologically. So it's just kind of finding what ways are most effective in a remote world. It was very good work just overall, just to try and learn what's effective messaging, especially in an online forum overall.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it was certainly, a unique situation, electoral wise, and now we're seeing it, as you serve. And I don't know if all of your respective councils and boards are meeting electronically, but I'm curious to hear a little bit about that. And also, what is it like, serving, with, I'm imagining, and I haven't checked the makeup of each of your individual, boards, but what is it like serving with presumably people who are, older? You're probably, one of the younger people in the room, or in the virtual room, as it were. I know the average age, as Molly Lanowen pointed out in the chat a few minutes ago, the average age at the state legislature is like 66. New Hampshire, of course, is the second oldest state, which is why we've talked about it's so important to have these young perspectives here. But what's it like being the one of the younger people in the room during these policy discussions? Mike, how about you?
Sure. Well, it was a little bit unique in Keene because there was such a young wave that all started at the same time that I did. Our mayor is, I believe, 35, I think, and we ended up in the same election cycle in November of 2019. I believe we added 4 or 5 new councilors that are all under 40. So it's spectacular for trying to get younger representation, but it also meant it was easier for us when we're onboarding, because there's a whole cluster of us that are all kind of going through the same, we're learning at the same rate. And also it has a bit of a downside potentially in that, yes, there is if there was an illusion or there was actually an old boys club there or something like that, now there's the worry that, oh, wait, is this a new club coming in now that's trying to take over? And I think that caused some threatened feelings potentially, which was kind of interesting. And that actually goes into some of the later questions. But I think there isn't as much of that talking down to a younger person, partially because I'm not that much younger than them. But we reduced the average age in the 2019 election. I did the math on, I think we reduced the average age by like 7 years, down into, I think it's in the 50s now is the average age, and it used to be in the 60s. So it was interesting, but I don't think the effect is as dramatic necessarily in Keene because so many young people all got elected at the same time.
How are things looking in Exeter, Levy?
Things are interesting. So I think specifically for me, it's not the actual board members themselves, because I would say that we're on average a slightly younger board than other communities, but it's the external partnerships of different departments that we work with who've been, working for 25 years or different subcommittees that have been together for 15 years. And so when trying to have a conversation occasionally, you're met with, well, you don't know what you're talking about. And so you have to be, as a, a new politician, I guess, prepared for that, but also prepared to say, yes, I may not understand specifically what you're talking about, but here's what knowledge I bring to the table. And have you considered this? So it's figuring out diplomatic ways to have conversations sometimes with people who don't want to hear your opinion, and being okay with that. And I think sometimes it just takes time for people to realize that you're not coming in to stop what progress they're, whatever they're trying to do, because the goal is to make everything better for the majority of people, for those who might not have been recognized before. So that's kind of the message that I try to put forth when I meet with, different groups who are not accustomed to meeting with somebody who is a novice, I guess, in the political sphere. But it's been a great ride thus far. Like I think I'm I'm enjoying it, and I do hope that others who now work with me are learning a little bit too. But I'm not going to say it's a super easy transition.
Yeah, I imagine not, but yeah, as the comment just came through, this is the way it's always been, and that's
Exactly.
a
I hear a lot
perpetual
of that.
thing, and I'm sure when our generation is older, there'll be some of that too. But Jonathan, what's it like in Concord? I have to imagine you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the youngest person on that board, probably, huh?
Yeah, I'm the baby. I'm the baby of the board, which I kind of like love to use being young as like an advantage, because people expect you to go in like idealistic or not, or being just not really knowing what's going on. But in a way that kind of helps me, because then if I do something procedurally on purpose, I can just be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm ignorant, I'm young. When in turn, it actually just helping make the board like better, more efficient, because politics in general is so inefficient. And in general, I just like to use that as my calling card. But definitely when I was running, one of the biggest concerns I always had is, oh, you're not a homeowner, you're not a taxpayer. How can you really be making these choices? When in turn, like, there are many people who are not homeowners, and it just perpetuates this false narrative that you need to own a home to be successful, or you need to own a home to understand how to be a successful member of society. But I think, as I've learned, there's so much more to it. It's very multifaceted. And fortunately, there were 2 other members this year who were elected who were under 40. Another person in their late 20s, another person in their 30s. So I think the culture of the board is definitely shifting, and I can see it.
Yeah, we've had an audience question come in via chat that was sent to me directly from Jennifer, and I think it's kind of related on the age front here. She's wanting to know, question for everybody. She said, "What are each of your goals for engaging young professionals and young people into these environments to bring progress forward and not have New Hampshire known as one of the oldest states, and ensuring that we are bringing real matters forward for all ages?" I don't know, Jonathan, if you have the floor, you want to take that one and we can work across?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the reason why I ran, is just so people feel like it's attainable. We only had people for the past like 20 years in their 50s to 60s, and running for school board out of high school seemed like a distant kind of dream. People didn't even know what school board was, to be honest. I didn't know who my school board member was. So it's about kind of introducing that the school board is this important function. It depends if you teach evolution or creationism. So it's just about kind of connecting the dots and educating students that they can go into this position. And not only that, but this is why you should. You can discuss whether you want to adjust hiring practices to diversify faculty. You can discuss whether you want to alter curriculum. You can discuss the SRO position. You can discuss so much that happens in schools using the school board as that position. So it's just about putting 2 and 2 together.
And Lovey, how about in Exeter? How are you and others able to, how are you able to work to bring in other young voices, to the conversation and into these environments? You're obviously, just one person. How can we get other young voices engaged?
So I love it when I get to sit on a panel like this and encourage people to run. We had our meeting last night, and one of the topics we were discussing about were term limits for different subcommittees that we have, and the need for, in my opinion, term limits. And what I said is, I don't want to be sitting in the position I am as a select board member in 10 years, 15 years running unopposed. I would be really upset. I would be upset that no one else thought to challenge me. I would be upset that no one else thought to, come in with new ideas and potentially take my seat. And so even as this just being my first year on the select board, my goal is to make sure that there are others who want to sit where I'm sitting, who are now having a different experience than I had coming into it. Exeter is a really interesting town because we've got the boarding school here, we've got low income housing, we have big houses, we have smaller homes, we have independent businesses, we have, so we run the gamut. So it's important that we have all of those pieces of the puzzle represented. And COVID really showed us the need for that. When conversations were coming up about, well, what do we do to help certain groups? There weren't a lot of people who were represented from certain populations within our community who should have had a louder voice when we were making decisions about certain things. So I think it's really important, not just having just young, but socioeconomic we need everyone to sort of come to the table so that their voices are heard.
Absolutely. And Mike, I know you said in Keene, you've had, kind of this influx of a younger cohort that came in, with yourself in 2019. Has that resulted in more young people getting involved, in a more general, manner of, weighing in on particular policy issues? And, to Lovey's point too, not just young people, but people of more diverse backgrounds and perspectives.
I think that it's certainly happening. It's hard to tell because there are so many different positions in the various functions of government. It's hard to have visibility to all of it, but a council seat did vacate a couple months ago, and we had a interim election among just the councilors, and there were two candidates that applied, both of them in their 30s. So we actually got another person, not even through general election, that is now under 40, that has just joined council as well. So I think that was encouraging to see that these are the people that are interested in running. And I think, again, you're right. Everything that Lovey's saying, I completely agree with. We really need to make sure that the voices are heard and that we have turnover. Turnover is a good thing. And as the old adage goes, politicians are like diapers, must be changed frequently and for the same reasons. And I couldn't agree more. That's a problem when someone is on the council for 30 years. They're not going to randomly change their views. They're not going to necessarily evolve as the town evolves necessarily. They might, but it's easier to continue to pull in new representation, and that reflects the evolving demographics of a town, and that is important. And certainly as a town that is, we'd love to have more younger people because we have Keene State College in town, but too many of them leave immediately after they graduate. So that even though our number says we're a younger town, that's really skewed by the college. So getting that younger representation to represent the interests, not just of college age, but immediately thereafter is critical.
So of course, I think that's it's definitely needed, like you said, that turnover and getting more young people in particular. Of course, that's why Stay Work Play exists, in promoting more young people here in New Hampshire and getting more young people involved. But of course, sometimes that's easier said than done, and there's reasons, I think legitimate reasons that you don't often see young people running for office, at both the local and state levels. That young people generally have full-time jobs and often have kids they have to get taken care of after work, get them fed and do homework and bath time, and all that good stuff. What is like from a day-to-day, week-to-week perspective? Can you give folks who are watching today, just give you an idea, like what are your official duties like? How much time does it take? Is it really a burden? Is it something you struggle with? Is it a part-time job? Is it something you do a couple of hours a week? How does it fall?
I'll jump in. So it varies. So the SAU Budget Advisory Committee is a great starting point for anyone who's, a smaller committee is a great starting point if you want to sort of test the waters. That committee, we met once a week for 3 months straight to review the budget and vote on it and attend meetings. So that was a great start for me. The select board meets more often. And part of it is, COVID, we're having all remote meetings via Zoom. And so I think like last night we had a 4.5-hour meeting, which is not completely unheard of, but it allows everyone from the town more access to our meetings, which I actually appreciate. So local folks can jump in, call in, share their opinions where they otherwise might not have come in person to one of our meetings. So I think that's an advantage. It's mostly evenings. I sit on 3 other committees, and the committees meet 1 to 2 times a month. And they vary from a 1-hour meeting in the morning. Some of them are in the evening. But I'm still able to do all of the different things that I need to do. I don't feel completely overwhelmed by it. And, I have 2 kids working and still able to somehow, go out and play squash and tennis occasionally. So it's definitely, and I just have to throw in that, Mike, I was also a rugby player in college. So, it's possible. You're going to work hard. It's not going to be super, time consuming, but you will have to sort of let go of other things with your timing. So it's very doable is what I'll say.
Mike and Jonathan, how about y'all? Mike?
Yeah, I think it depends on the committee that you're on, or the committees that you're on, and it also depends on the issue a lot for me. If there's an issue that I think is really important, and I think that I can potentially lend more of a voice towards. For instance, I'm an engineer, so a lot of like the technical sciencey type stuff are the issues that I feel like I have slightly more qualification to be able to speak on. I'll put a lot more work into making sure that I have full understanding of the issue, reading, researching, all that kind of thing. I was totally lied to when I first ran about how much time commitment there was, and I still hold that against the people that convinced me. They said, oh yeah, it's 2 meetings a month, no problem. And then it became, oh yeah, by the way, you're also going to be on another committee. That's also 2 times a month. Oh, by the way, you also have to prepare for all your meetings. It's still not overwhelming though. To Lovey's point, it's not overwhelming. It is certainly like anything, like education, like whatever. It's what you put into it. So if you want to obsess and spend your whole life doing council things, you could probably spend that amount of time. But most counselors, I'd say, spend somewhere between probably 5-10 hours a week if they're preparing for all their meetings and things like that. Actual meeting time, yeah, it's an hour or 2 a week. It's not terrible, but it is you get out of it what you put into it, like anything.
Very well said. What about you, Jonathan?
I think picking off a point that you said at the beginning, Will, about what kind of you do in the position, I guess that's where New Hampshire politics is very exclusive as well, because it's like a citizen volunteer legislature. These aren't like really paid positions. I guess for school board, I get $1,000 a year. So it's more than our state legislators. But on that end, I think similar to Mike, probably like 5 to 10 hours a week during normal times. During budgetary season is when it's like a full-time job, which was through February and March. We had over like 30 meetings, and some of them being 4+ hours, 3 meetings a week, which is a lot of time for a position that you would consider volunteering in. And I think for each member, some people take it more seriously. Some people are more active, more hands-on. And that's kind of one of the reasons I want to be is more hands-on. But it's definitely, it's more than you anticipate, but I think similar to Mike and Lovey, it's nothing that you can't do if you actually want to do it. And I think most people who actually are in these roles want to do it, so it doesn't feel like a burden.
So thank you all for for being honest. I think both there are sometimes people just assume oh it's definitely it's always going to be a full-time job or it's nothing so appreciate the honest kind of look, and all offices are different, all towns are different too, certainly. Jonathan, you mentioned kind of salary as it were. You mentioned, I think all of these here in New Hampshire, I think with the exception of maybe the governor and maybe a few mayors across the state, these are all volunteer positions essentially. Jonathan, you mentioned getting $1,000. Lovey and Mike, if you don't mind me asking, like do you receive any kind of compensation, salary or any type of other fringe benefit for this volunteer service?
Truth be told, I didn't even realize there was a financial payment of any kind when I ran for office. And then they said, oh, we need your W-2s. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And then you realize that what you get is really, it's nominal for the amount of work that you do, but it's appreciated that there is something given. I think it's maybe more than $1,000 a year. I'm not even sure. It's not. It's
Yeah, I think it's. I know they raised the amount that counselors got, I think, a year or two before I got elected. I believe it was. I think it was $1,500. Now it's $2,500 a year, I believe. But I also campaigned on the promise of donating the whole amount to the Young Professionals Network every year. So that's basically, we can fund an organization on the salary, and because we're cheap. But it's again nominal for if I do out the hourly rate that comes out to, it makes me very sad. So I choose to just think of it as a donation.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a quarter an hour or something like that. Well, thank you all certainly for what you're doing it, and obviously no one is serving in office in New Hampshire to get rich, that's for sure. I am curious, Lovey, you mentioned kind of like being surprised that you got even like a nominal amount of money for what you're doing, but I'm curious, in more of a serious vein, like what's been for all of you, what's been kind of the most surprising thing about being in office that you didn't expect when you ran?
I think for me on the select board, it's actually the amount of, and I hate to say power, but it's the amount of, power that 5 individuals have over an entire town. And I don't think people realize that these 5 individuals are sitting together, and oftentimes without public comment or participation, deciding what's going to happen to an entire sewer system, or deciding what road is going to be closed off or opened or restructured. So these are really big decisions that I think sometimes people who live in a town just assume everyone else is participating in, and it's like, no, you need to be participating in it. And so part of what I hope the message that I send today is not just about running for office, but being present in the room during these meetings. All of these meetings for all of the different committees, all of the different boards are open to the public, and the public has a voice. And it's very hard when a board sits together and there are 20 people from the public who are saying, we don't want you to do that, for the board to just go ahead and say, oh, we don't care what you think. So that's part of it too. I think people really need to start showing up in their communities and sharing their voice, and not assuming that folks who sit on a board are just doing what they think is best, because they may not know. They may not know as much information as you think. So I'm not saying that I don't know everything, but I don't know everything. So I like when people come and share their thoughts and experiences with me.
Yeah, absolutely. None of us is a subject matter expert in everything, for sure. Mike and Jonathan, how about what's surprised the both of you about being once you've been elected?
I think the thing that surprised me the most is coming from an engineering background without really any public service, official elected public service. I didn't have to politic before. And that was something that surprised me more than I expected it to. Obviously, shaking hands is something and going around and doing campaigning, but actually there, and when I come in and I'm a bit of a jerk to my coworkers, you know, I come in hard with a lot of just data and how can you not understand this? And I've really learned how to say, okay, that's not going to get what I need done. That's not going to get my point across in any effective way. And I think it's helped me evolve personally quite a bit as far as how do I actually interact with my fellow counselors. There's 15 of us, and if I don't have 8 people like me, I'm not going to basically get my point heard, whatever I'm trying to promote, whatever the issue might be. So I think that's the one thing I was most surprised about is, oh yeah, it is a microcosm of other politics. We're a nonpartisan committee, which is amazing, and it's the way that I would want it. But even within there are little there's cliques, there's groups, and those will shift depending on what the issue is. So learning how to work better with other people when it comes to a political nature, and learning that handshake you made might not have meant what you thought it did. And it's been very enlightening in that respect. It's not about logic. It's about, you know, who you're talking to when.
Yeah, logic and politics aren't words that are often put together in the same sentence. That is a truism for sure. Jonathan, what surprised you on the Concord School Board?
I think definitely on the outside it is easy to assume people's like intentions or motivations, or that you don't really know them from the outside. And not that people always are so different than what you expect, but I think what I realized is, especially being in COVID, seeing people across from a screen or only hearing their voice and never actually being like personable or like humanizing someone, I think it was really important to actually get to know the people on the board and not just see them as like a voice, a distant voice that I get mad at every once in a while, but actually people with like opinions. And also I was very surprised by just certain members on the board that ran on different things, that they're very open to learning. And I think that's very important and sometimes very rare nowadays. Like sometimes people just like hearing their own voice or are there and just there to talk, but that people are actually willing to listen and talk and engage and want to engage was really great.
So, that kind of leads into my next question a little bit, Jonathan, if I can, extrapolate a little bit or maybe assume a little bit about things that are like, both frustrating, which it sounds like that can be, those people who just like to hear themselves talk. And yeah, that's a proportion just of the general population, but especially seems overrepresented in politics. But I'm curious to know from each of you, like, what's been the most frustrating thing? And on the flip side of that, what's been the most like rewarding thing about serving in local office? Jonathan, you want to take a stab at that?
I could just pick back up. I think, I don't know about frustrating, but really challenging for me, coming from like an activist background, you might say, is like the difference between like activism and being in politics. I know people talk about it a lot, but I just feel like it's so true. It's I can't just scream all the time and yell at people, even if I want to, especially during public comment. That could be very, very tempting. But kind of reining in and thinking about the implications of each decision for not just people that I'm close to or that I used to work with, but how it might affect people that I disagree with. And I think that is one of the more challenging components. What has been really rewarding overall, I think, is just learning about all the nuances in the district and all the little cogs of the machine, you might say, that help make things go. Different collective bargaining agreements. Definitely learned a lot about unions and the importance of labor laws. And just, I think there's all these little things that have been so great to learn about and that also are very accessible if someone just helps you learn them.
How about you, Lovey? What's been frustrating? What's been rewarding?
I can quickly say what's frustrating is the slow process in which some things happen. Because I'm like, it's not that hard. Like, why can't we just change it? Things can happen very, very, very slowly because you have to go through at least 10 different departments before it circles back. And then once it circles back, then you have to wait until the next meeting before you can provisionally vote on it. So it's slow. But what's really rewarding is when you actually get to make a change in something and it has an immediate effect on a group of people. I'll give an example. Last night we were voting on, and it's taken almost a year to get this, voting on allowing access to our Swayze Parkway, which is the parkway that's used for public, picnics. There's a walkway through, and there was a yoga studio that was really struggling business wise, and they needed a space outdoors that was safe in order to practice during COVID. Finally, last night, we were able to pass that. And so, seeing that a business can now do something that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to because we were able to assist them in that was very rewarding. And it's like, okay, so things can happen. And when they do, it feels good. But it's frustrating having some of these longer processes.
No doubt. How about you, Mike? What have you taken away in this past year and a half or so?
Well, a big part of it is what I was just speaking about, where just the frustration comes from the politic part of politics. That was again, it was surprising to me and also became frustrating. But I think the other thing that I found frustrating originally that ended up really transitioning into something that now I find incredibly rewarding is that there is still this kind of vacuum in which a lot of these decisions happen, not at a vacuum that we've created, but a vacuum just because people don't pay attention to the meetings. Like I think both Jonathan and Levy had mentioned, the engagement is really poor. And that's not even a demographic thing specifically. It's just the number of people purely that show up to these meetings and actually pay attention, even in COVID, when it's incredibly easy to get on Zoom and say, what are you guys talking about? Oh, there it is. It's the engagement is so low. But the rewarding part of that, though, is it means that when we do make a decision, it's really kind of exciting to be the one that can go out there and tell people, hey, this is happening now. In case you were wondering, like, I know you might have heard a rumbling about it, but this is happening. We decided on it last night, and this is going to fundamentally change the way that X is, whether it's, that sidewalk's getting fixed today. Or like next week, it's gonna get fixed, and people get excited about that stuff. I mean, you find out that your road is next on the list. That's awesome. And again, I'm on the facilities committee, so that's what I deal with, is roads and sidewalks mostly. But people get excited about that, and they like to interact with their elected officials. And as an elected official, if you get excited about that, then it can be incredibly rewarding.
I think too, at the local level, for elected officials, as opposed to maybe the state and federal levels, I mean, you're dealing with like real world stuff, to your point, Mike, that that affects people directly. Like if the trash doesn't get picked up tomorrow, like that impacts somebody's quality of life negatively. If it does, it's awesome. And same thing with the pothole gets filled at the end of your street or whatever it is. These are real world problems and issues that you're dealing with and solving for your neighbors. I want to ask one more question, and then I know we've had a couple come in the chat that we want to get to in our time, but curious to know what advice would you have for anyone who's here with us today or might be watching this recording in the future who might be considering running for local office. You were able, all of you have been able to talk a little bit about the kind of the nuts and bolts and the good, the bad, the ugly, the surprising. But if people are still, after all of this, taking it all in, they're still considering running for office, what advice would you give to them?
I'll start with that, and I think it's going to be echoing a lot of what's been said tonight. But find a committee. Just find a small committee. It's the easiest way in, and you can jump into the deep end with both feet. Go for it. Good luck. And you might succeed. You might enjoy it, but it's a lot easier when you learn about how the things function from a subcommittee first. Most towns in New Hampshire are always looking for people, just bodies to fill some of these committees. Join as an alternate even. You don't even have a commitment to show up then, but you just show up and listen in the background. It's better to be informed before you suddenly are the one making the decisions. And I'm glad that I lost a few times, because it really gave me an opportunity to really spend more time, get involved in committees. And then by the time I did get elected, I felt like I was going in a lot more prepared.
Lovey and Jonathan, what advice would each of you give?
I would absolutely echo that. Join committees, attend meetings, introduce yourself to board members of a particular board that you want to run for. Because that just shows the interest, true interest of, I want to learn a little bit before I step into this sphere. Also, there are a lot of different programs, free programs out there that you can learn about, finance or whatever the case may be, so that you feel a little more prepared when coming into the political realm. Because what'll happen is, when you're campaigning, you'll be asked questions about certain things, and saying, well, I just don't know for everything is not going to work so well. So if you really want to run a strong campaign, give yourself some baseline knowledge. Talk to people who are in positions right now. Talk to people like myself, like Mike, like Jonathan. Learn a little bit about what it is that you're hoping to do, so that you can say, I'm not an expert on this, but this is what I was thinking because this is what I know. So that would be, I think, my biggest push or recommendation for folks.
Well, thank you all. Yeah, this has been great. As a reminder, if people do have questions, we do have a little while longer left today. So this is your chance to ask questions. So feel free to throw them down there in the chat. I'll give one from that Callie put in a little bit earlier. She said, I would love to hear how the presenters are advocating for the needs in their communities. How are these needs identified, and what steps are they taking to support change? Anybody want to jump in on that? How do you identify what needs to be done, and then how do you actually figure something out? You identify something that needs to change. Then how do you go about changing it? It's a big question, I know.
I'll throw it in really quickly. So when COVID started, one of my biggest concerns was safety for domestic related issues at home. And so part of what I did is I said, let me speak to police officers. And I went down to the police station, fire station, to actually ask them, what are the numbers? Are we seeing an uptick in terms of perhaps violence taking place at home? Do we have emergency numbers or safety numbers that families have access to, that students have access to through their teachers? It's literally having those kinds of conversations with folks and talking to the different departments within your town to figure out, what do we need to do? Because sometimes they're so busy in the different departments that they don't necessarily think to come to you first. And as a board member, I thought, this is of interest to me. This is something that I'm thinking about. So I'm going to make sure that we're having the conversation about it.
Yeah, to pick up on that, I think it's about knowing that you don't know anything. You don't know everything, but you know where to tell people to go. And I think that's one of the important factors of the role, is that you know the resources available and that dispense in for the community. For example, if someone wants to know about someone wanted to know about the grading policy at Concord High School. I don't know anything. I'm old now. I'm 4 years out of there, but I directed them to the superintendent, and the superintendent then directed them to the principal, who then directed them to a staff. So then you see this almost assembly line, how we work together to directly address. And while you can't do it, or I can't do it by myself, we work together to kind of solve this collective goal.
First off, why didn't anyone tell me my background never got flipped? Oh man, I forgot to mirror my image. Sorry. Just noticed that now finally.
No,
The
it
New Hampshire Nexus background.
It displays right on our end. It just looks backwards on yours.
Oh, good. Okay, so it's my mirror that's actually wrong.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Anyways, I think one of the things that I did immediately, actually before getting elected, was joined whatever community groups are available out there too. because a lot of times it's council meeting can be an intimidating process for people to attend. I know it was before I was on council, and it still is now that I am on council at times, but there are a lot of like sub-community groups, and I happen to be a ward councilor, which means my geographic area inside Keene is relatively limited. But I joined some other community groups like on Facebook and things like that that aren't even part of that. I don't even represent them officially, but I'm getting, if I get a feel for, hey, these are the things that people are complaining about on there. These are the big issues that they're worried about. And just even the, like, Facebook is a horrible entity that I really don't like, but boy, it's really good when you just want to like listen without even people knowing that you're listening to what they're saying. You pay attention on there. What are they talking about? Oh, wow, this road has a lot of potholes. Back to potholes again. But also bigger things than that. I mean, we have okay, these people live near the airport. They're concerned about this ordinance that's going to be put in. These people live near the college. They're concerned about this ordinance that we're discussing right now. It's in this world, it's a lot easier to pay attention and to listen, even when it may not necessarily even be when you are at a meeting.
That's a very good point. And, sometimes, there's no shortage of concerns that people have. And in older times, it was much more difficult unless they called you directly, to let you know. But there are multiple avenues if you know where to look and where to listen. Have one other question that's come through. And again, if anyone has any others, feel free to throw them in the chat. But the final question that I have here, we've had there's been a little bit of conversation in the chat around this, but just thought it was be worth talking about a little bit more. Is asked, I often think about how the lack of or low payment for office salary-wise is a barrier to low-income individuals in becoming involved in politics. And I'd say this is especially true here in New Hampshire. Is this something that is discussed at all when compensation comes up?
It's not currently discussed as we can provide more compensation for folks who are running, but the conversations are now happening. And I think, I hate to keep going back to like COVID, but one of the greatest things about COVID is that we have access to this. So we see that this can be done remotely, which provides an opportunity, I think, for some working individuals who can't leave work to come to a meeting, but it gives them access to work remotely if you're a single parent and can't leave your child home and you want to attend meetings. So this is one of the conversations that I think has now been brought to the table in a much more clear way, that we have options. There's not just one way to do it, and we should not be looking at just one group of people who happen to have money and free time. And, not saying that everyone does, but there, if you look around, the majority of the people who are able to sit in these positions are financially able to sit in these positions because they can afford to. So it's one of the conversations that I think citizens need to also push for more. So if they want to see, I don't know, even if one seat is subsidized at a higher rate, like that's a conversation to bring to board members to say, is that feasible?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was kind of one of the main concerns I had while running. Like, it's very exclusive, and I'm privileged to live with my family and be able to have them financially support me while I do this. But is that kind of just making it worse? Because then I'm not getting someone from a lower socioeconomic background in this, or someone who has a different perspective as me that is not represented on the board. And I think that is one of the sad truths about New Hampshire politics in general, including in the state legislature. And I think you could find that really wide, that there's a sense of, as Lovey said, like financial security that's not always required, but it definitely makes it better. Because if you want to encourage someone who's working maybe 2 jobs, you also have to consider, do you want to put that extra burden on them to make them feel like, yes, I want to attend these board meetings. I have these board meetings then 3 times a week, sometimes 1 time a week even. Is that really something that is sustainable? So how then do you create that environment? I know, as people said in the comments, kind of to support. And are these conversations happening yes, kind of on the side. Is it something I would love to see before I get off the board? Yes. And my goal was like obviously advocating while I'm not on the board for it will be a lot easier. So people aren't just thinking, oh, this 22-year-old, 23-year-old just wants to pay himself $20,000, $30,000. It's no, when he leaves, then people will get paid $20,000, $30,000. And while that might not be as significant as something else, it just all counts when you're trying to make it more accessible.
Yeah, I think somewhat to Levy's point is that the COVID has taught us a lot about what is and isn't possible here. Some of the issues are still going to come back to 91A issues, where as much as we would love to have a virtual option permanently, that's going to require a law change in order for it to not require, roll call votes for every single vote. Even if 14 of the 15 of us are in person, we still need to do a roll call vote, which is it's cumbersome. And again, for an institution as inefficient as government, making it even less efficient, it's not something a lot of people want to see. I think having the low salary, it has the benefit of making sure people are doing it for the right reason, but no one's going to get rich on 10K as opposed to 1K. So I think it still might keep the incentive in place. I think what the better way to approach it, though, is to try to change the job function and the way that the job works, rather than trying to focus on the financial part. Unless we want these to be full-time jobs, it's going to be hard to find the room in budgets to increase 15 positions all up to a certain level, whether it's a token position that is subsidized or what. I think at the end, it really needs to be about access and making sure that the positions are accessible for everyone to be able to be part of it. And I think some of that, again, has to come from the 91A type things. This was what a lot of the young folks that all got elected in 2019 we talked about with the newspapers and everything ahead of time, was saying, hey, I'm hoping to have kids soon, and I don't know how that's going to work with council. Am I going to be able to actually attend a meeting in person? And then COVID hit 3 months later, and we found out, yeah, we can. This is possible, but it's cumbersome. And how do we streamline it while still keeping the access opportunities available for everyone in the community?
Thank you. We've had one more question come in. John Green asks, in terms of basic public participation, have you found any effective ways to increase engagement/participation from your constituents? Do you have any ideas on how to get more people involved in town meetings, discussions, issues, etc.?
I guess I could start. I think it's about inviting people into the conversation. Just texting your friends, family, neighbors in town. Even if they don't go, you'll just at least tell them. And then they'll be like, hey, did you talk to Jonathan today? Yeah, he's going to be at the school board meeting tonight. Oh, school board? How do I go to that? And while that might not always happen, the more people you tell and the more people you engage with, the more likely they'll engage with they will engage with other people. And I just think the invitation in general is not a small thing, because otherwise people will not even consider it if you just say, I'm going to this. But if you say, would you like to come with me to this? And that in general, I think is a very important step, is providing that hand that says, you should come here, you should talk to this. And I think before meetings, I also just do a social media blitz to try and be like, come on out, do this, check it out. And that helps make it just another reminder.
And I'm along the same lines as Mike. Potholes. I mean, really, find the thing that's going to bring people to the meetings. Like if you say, oh, wow, they're thinking of getting rid of all of the food trucks in town, and people really like food trucks, and invite them to come because you need them to voice their opinions. People just need to be asked sometimes, like individually asked, like, I would like for you to come to my meeting. And they say, okay. And sometimes it's just as easy as that. Like individual contacts is probably the best way to get the message out. And then just start a chain from one person to another, inviting them.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the thing that does bring people out currently is not what I'd like to see be the thing, and that's usually fear mongering and things like that. Like that's the way that whenever we have a ton of people show up to a meeting, it's because someone went online and started saying all sorts of stuff that might not be completely true about what the actual issue is at hand. But I think the other side of that is figure out a way of making people comfortable at these meetings. You know, if some of that is who you know, are there people there that you're going to be viewing the meeting with? This is in person. Obviously, Zoom's a little bit different, but if you're there in person, you get to sit next to someone that you can then, give them the eyebrow raise. Oh, really? Oh, okay. You saw that too, right? Interesting. Okay. It's about if they feel like they actually can have a conversation with you, but also are comfortable being in front of a group like that. Again, I was intimidated as anything going to council meetings originally when I was just there to see what was happening. I was afraid, somehow I was magically going to get called on, and even though I didn't stick my hand up, and I was terrified of that. And it's things like that. If you're comfortable, people will come. If it's a comfortable situation, people are more likely to show up to it. They're more likely to engage, and they're more likely to contribute.
Very well said. And thank you all for weighing in, for joining us today, and sharing your lived experiences and kind of the hopes, the fears, the good, the bad, the ugly, and giving us a realistic picture of what it's like. And I think if I've taken anything away from this, it's that while it's not without effort and work that and not without frustration from time to time, that serving an elected office at the local level is inherently rewarding and meaningful, and that young people in particular can step up and get involved, and starting out small, as it were, maybe at a local committee or subcommittee, get your feet wet, see if it's something you like, and then maybe dip your toe in the bigger pond of school board or town council. So thank you for showing us what's possible, and how we can all get involved in some form or fashion at the local level, depending on how we most feel comfortable and able and willing to do so. Here at Stay Work Play, we love to help facilitate discussions like this. They really are great, and to help make connections. And we hope that we were able to do that for all of you out there today. And we thank you for joining us. And if you're not already registered for the rest of the sessions that'll be taking place during New Hampshire Next Summit for Young Changemakers for the rest of the week, we encourage you to do so. As I mentioned, we talked about young arts leaders yesterday, making change via art. Today, of course, we talked to our local young policymakers. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to hear from young people in New Hampshire who are working to make our communities more anti-racist, more welcoming, and more connected. And creating change through community is our theme tomorrow. Thursday, our theme is creating change through environment. And we're going to hear from young people here in the state who are making positive changes, enhancing our state's food systems and our outdoor natural resources. And then finally, on Friday, the theme is continuing the change, and we're going to hear from a number of our past Rising Stars Awards winners here at Stay Work Play, kind of where they are now and what they're doing and how they're continuing to make an impact here in New Hampshire. So I hope you'll continue to take your lunch breaks with us for the rest of the week, and you can find more information and register at the link that'll be thrown down here in the chat in just a moment. Lastly, speaking of Rising Stars, I'd like to let everyone know that nominations for the 2021 Rising Stars are now open. And for more information on how to nominate somebody, to see all of our award categories, please check out stayworkplay.org/Rising Stars Awards. The more nominations we have from the more people, the more communities represented, the better. With that, thank you all again for taking part in today's session. We hope that it's certainly worth your while. We certainly hope that. And we encourage you to please keep an eye on your inbox and on social media for upcoming Stay Work Play events. With that, thank you and have a great day.